The public sector affects every aspect of life in the UK. This podcast will give you exclusive news, interviews, and insights from the people responsible for building and shaping the country's future. In each episode, we'll be joined by key figures in the public sector, covering everything from the environment to the economy. Hi, and welcome to Public Sector Voices. I'm Chris Cromar, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Cambridgeshire County Councillor Alex Bulat. Hi Alex, how are you?
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm very well. How about yourself?
Yes, I'm good, thanks, thank you. So back in March, Cambridgeshire County Council passed your motion calling for the extension of local election voting rights to all qualifying foreign nationals, as at the moment only European Union and Commonwealth citizens can vote in local elections. Originally, you're from Romania, and I saw that you recently tweeted that you did not know that you could vote when you came to the UK. Can you tell me a bit more about your background and your journey into politics?
Yes, that's right. When I arrived in the UK, I was 18 years old, so I came here with an offer to study. I moved to the University of Sussex near Brighton, and I found out quite randomly I could vote. Of course, as an EU citizen, I could vote in local elections, but I didn't know this for the first couple of years in the UK. And when I found out that I could vote, I also wasn't necessarily the most interested person in politics. I would say that until the Brexit referendum in 2016, which was the moment when I realized, I think for the first time, that decisions taken in the UK do affect me directly as a migrant in the UK. Until then, I wasn't very involved, even after I knew I had the right to vote. So it took me a bit of time, I think, as it is the case for a lot of my migrant friends. It takes a lot of time to get used to the system, to know what local authorities do, for example, to know what decisions are taken at the local level, to know how you can contribute to local decisions as well. So yeah, my journey in the UK, I actually lived in the UK when I was 2 years old and 3 years old. I lived near Leeds in Skipton. My father, in 1997, he was working in a short contract for the NHS. And then we returned to Romania. It was quite difficult then. Romania was not in the EU. It was quite difficult to come with all the family here. But then I always had in mind that I wanted to return to the UK. So that's why I moved to the UK when I was 18, when I turned 18 in 2012. Since then, I've been studying, working alongside my studies. Wasn't really involved in politics until after the referendum, when I found out, okay, this actually affects me directly. So I started, not with politics straight away, I started volunteering and campaigning for migrant rights organizations. That's why migration became one of my main topics of interest. So I started campaigning for EU migrant rights in the UK in various campaigns, and then only from 2017 I got involved in party politics, and actually 2021, last year, when I became a county councillor, was my very first election.
Very good. So you've done a lot in your time in politics. So tell me, why did you decide to put forward this motion to the council?
Yes, I think as most councillors, we go out, every single week. Many of us do door knocking, go door to door and speak with residents. Others have residents meetings. And it's very frequently, especially in areas like Cambridgeshire, but I think across the country, that we meet residents who come to us as councillors with various issues. And then we realize that those residents don't have a say in the local area. For example, I have residents from Ukraine, for example, now from Turkey, from the United States in my ward, and they've been living in the area, many of them for 10, 20 years. Some people have been living here for decades, and they don't have a vote in local elections. So if you think about this, those people like me who use the local roads, use the parks, their children use the local schools, use all the services, various services that local authorities provide, yet for some reason they don't have a say in how those decisions are taken locally. So I think the idea behind the motion and behind the idea of residence-based local election voting rights in general is that you should have a say, at least at the local level, at the very least, where you live and where you pay your taxes. When you get your council tax bill at home, no one asks you what nationality you are. No one says, oh, you're from the United States. You can't vote, therefore you don't have to pay this tax. So I do believe, as a person, as a councillor as well, but also personally, I do believe in this idea of no taxation without representation. That at the very least, what we can do is to have some say at the local level. And in many ways, the local elections do involve decisions that affect us and that we can see affecting us every day. So from people who are, not happy about the state of the roads in our county, or people wanting better schools, better early years education, people wanting better community centers, or just better environmental policies and green spaces in our area. Those are all decisions taken by local councillors at the local level, and I think it's important to have a say. So that's the kind of principle of it, that we should have like some say where we live. But then the other issue that really does bother me in a way is that there's a lot of inequality in voting rights. So as you mentioned at the beginning, EU citizens can vote in local elections in England, and Commonwealth citizens can vote because Commonwealth citizens and Irish citizens can vote in all elections, including parliamentary elections. So, for example, you can have a street with two neighbors, someone who is, let's say, like me from Romania, who can still vote in those local elections on the 5th of May, and you can have someone from Republic of Moldova, the country next to Romania, let's say, who doesn't have Romanian citizenship, who's considered a non-EU country, who cannot vote in local elections, and they can be neighbors living for the same amount of time, paying the same council tax, using the same local services, and one of them has a say and the other doesn't. So I would like to see a fairer system in general. And the final point why I think I brought this motion is that the system already exists. So it's not, a very big, radical or controversial idea. This system of voting where you live in elections that affect you exists already in Scotland and Wales. In Scotland and Wales, in devolved elections, all qualifying foreign residents can vote. So it doesn't matter there if you're from the United States or from Nigeria or from Romania, you can vote in elections affecting you. And I think that's the right approach that should be expanded across the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. We are based here in Manchester and we have elections coming up in May, and my wife is actually American, so I'll be able to vote, but she won't be able to vote, and she only comes from 2 hours from the Canadian border. So if she was born 2 hours to the north in Canada, she'd be able to vote as well. And that's the thing, my wife and I have been discussing this, especially as I've had this podcast coming up, and she pays council tax, she uses the roads, the public services, and I think it would be a good idea for other citizens to be able to vote, especially at a local election, as it might make them more democratically engaged. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think it will send like a positive message as well, that everyone living in a local area has a say, and I think it will increase the participation we see in migrant communities. Because I think overall, it's true to say across the country, we have quite low turnout in local elections. And that's partly to do with the fact that we need more, I guess, across the board political education, what the local councils do. And this is true not only for people who just came or just arrived in the UK or new residents. It's actually true for British residents who've been living in the local authority for many, many years. I think we need more, councillors to engage more with, okay, what does actually the local authority do for you? What are the services that your council tax pay for? I know you get the council tax bill and you see the breakdown, but many people don't really read that or remember that. So I think there needs to be more engagement from the local authorities side in terms of, okay, those are the services we provide, this is how decisions are made and how it affects you. But for the migrant community specifically, I think it will send a positive message and will increase participation. If we look at voter registration, for the people who can vote in local level elections in England, we see, let's say, British and Irish citizens over 90% registered to vote. Then if we look at Commonwealth citizens who can also vote in all elections, a bit over 80%, it's from the latest study that I've seen, Electoral Commission, over 80% registered to vote. It was 80-something percent. But then if we look at EU citizens, only about half nationally are registered to vote. Of course, it's a bit higher in London, where there's been more engagement with EU citizens in general in politics, I think, from the Mayor of London's office and other local authorities. But in many areas, EU citizens still don't know they can vote, or EU citizens who voted before and were on the register before think because Brexit happened they can't vote anymore. Mm-hmm. I come across this very, very frequently in my area. People from the EU, I knock on their doors either for election or just for residence visits when I do a consultation on a different issue, and they're saying, well, I can't vote. And I ask where you're from, and they often say Italy or France or Romania. Well, Brexit happened, well, you can still vote. Of course, there's the whole other debate about the elections bill and how this will change voting rights. But for the 5th of May now, all EU citizens can still vote in all the local elections happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was the reaction like in the council chamber when you put forward this motion? Was there widespread support for it? Was there any opposition?
Yes, I think I did expect some opposition to it because it's not an idea that everyone does support, and I do recognize this. I think it's interesting because while the organization, the 3 Million Campaigns on EU Citizens' Rights, they commissioned a representative poll about seeing what is the percentage of residents who actually support, British people who support residency-based voting rights. It was actually 63%. 50%. So it has, you can say that this policy would have majority support. However, there is opposition, and this opposition was seen in the council chamber when I put forward the motion. The motion did pass because we have a joint administration, so Labour, Liberal Democrats, and Independents, so we all voted for it. There were a few Conservative members who abstained. A couple of them actually commented, had quite substantive contributions, and they did say that this is an interesting debate that is worth being at least considered. And I think it's an interesting topic of debate in general on how we structure our voting systems across, countries and different parts of the country. But again, we had some Conservative members who did oppose this motion and voted against this. And I think the main argument against this is not unsurprising, is the argument that, well, the UK already has, in their view at least, a very generous voting rights system. I would challenge this because obviously very close to home, if you compare England to Scotland and Wales, the English system is not very generous. And of course, the other countries like New Zealand and others who adopt a more liberal approach to voting rights. But there's this argument that the UK is already allowing many people to vote in elections, and we shouldn't expand it further, or that voting should be reserved for citizens of a country in general. And that's one of the arguments, because in a way you can structure voting rights systems by citizenship. So saying British citizens should vote. I mean, there are even people out there who are against Commonwealth citizens who have full voting rights now in the UK, or Irish citizens who have full voting rights for other reasons, not EU related. But there's always this argument of, okay, we should structure the voting rights system by citizenship. I have the opposing argument that I think the voting rights should be structured by residency, at least at the local level, because the local level decisions are so embedded in our everyday lives. And I think there's a difference. I think for the national elections, there's a totally different debate. There are countries who allow, for instance, all people who have settled status or permanent residency to vote in national elections as well. But I think for the local level, the basic idea is you pay council tax to live here, you should have some sort of a say. So yes, there are people opposed to that, but I think there is a majority support. And I think there's a majority support in the public as well, as shown by that poll. Of course, one poll can't predict the whole mood of the country, but I think that's something that when you explain to people, especially when you have examples and you say like, okay, your neighbor, your neighbor living on the same street is, for example, American, or is from another country, like another EU country, non-EU country, and can't have the right to vote. People kind of see why that is unfair in a way.
Yeah, definitely. As I was saying, my wife's American, and it's something I had never really thought about until she moved over to the UK. And we discuss local politics, whether it's the building of new apartments near us, or the state of the roads, or green spaces, for example. I do think it's a bit galling, to be honest, that I'm able to vote and she works here and isn't. But you're obviously on the march to change that. And do you think this could gather nationwide support? It's obviously supported in Cambridgeshire. Do you think it could grow across the country?
Yes, I think before this motion was passed in Cambridgeshire, the London Assembly passed a similar motion. Actually, I think it was in November or the autumn of last year. So actually they were first to pass a similar motion saying that the London Assembly supports all residents to be able to vote in local London elections. So I think, yes, I do encourage councillors who are hearing this and who have seen what passed at Cambridgeshire County Council and London Assembly to perhaps put forward a similar motion in their own local authorities. I think it's important that local authorities, if they agree with this, they send this message to the government, because one of the things in the motion was for our chief executive to write to the responsible minister to say that Cambridgeshire County Council does support this policy. So it's good sending this political message. However, at the local level, we can't change those voting rights. So ultimately, the voting rights are decided at Westminster. So currently we have the elections bill still going through the different stages. It's still in the House of Lords. And the elections bill is quite worrying from a number of perspectives, but one of them related to voting rights is that some EU citizens will be removed from the electoral roll. So currently for the 5th of May, all EU citizens will be able to vote on the 5th of May elections. But after the elections bill becomes law, if it's not amended, right? So if it becomes law in its current form, then only the EU citizens who arrived in the UK before the 1st of January 2021 and who have pre-settled or settled status will keep their voting rights. So you have, again, another type of inequality in voting rights. You have, let's say, a neighbor who is Romanian and arrived before 1st of January, has settled status, will continue to vote as they have been before. and you'll have someone, a Romanian neighbor who arrived after the 1st of January, who could vote on the 5th of May and voted on the 5th of May, let's say in Cambridge, and then they will be told perhaps in the next elections, sorry, I have to remove you because this election bill passed and then you're not eligible to vote anymore. So that is really unfair because it creates another layer of inequality, not only within different EU and non-EU countries, non-Commonwealth countries, but also within EU populations. And then it also becomes very difficult, I think, for local authorities and for campaigners and politicians to explain those changes, because you currently have to ask, okay, are you from the EU or are you from the Commonwealth or are you Irish? Okay, you can vote on the 5th of May. It's still like a bit, you have to ask some questions to identify and have to know which countries are in the Commonwealth as a local campaigner. But it's easier than it will be. So after the elections bill becomes law, if it becomes law unamended, you have to ask, okay, you're from the EU. When did you arrive in the UK? Did you arrive before the 1st of January 2021? Do you have pre-settled or settled status? And does your country have a bilateral deal with the UK? Because if you arrived after the 1st of January 2021, you'll still be able to vote only if you have this bilateral deal. So then people from Poland, Portugal, Spain, and Luxembourg, even if they arrived after, they will still be able to vote. But someone from, let's say, Romania or France who arrived after won't be able to. So it will create a lot more complexity, both for local authorities, for the registration offices, and of course for people who are, like me, on the doorstep trying to figure out who can vote and who should be encouraged to vote. So that's one of the many arguments why a residency-based voting rights system is not only a fairer but also an easier approach and a less costly approach as well for elections in general, because everyone, will have the same rule for everyone. It's much easier to implement. Yeah, I have to say this doesn't affect, of course, Scotland and Wales, because that's devolved powers for the local franchise. It affects England and Northern Ireland.
Yep, absolutely. And you were saying your motion asked for the Chief Executive of Cambridgeshire County Council, Stephen Moyer, to write to the Minister of State for the Cabinet Office to amend the Elections Bill. Has that letter been sent?
I'll have to check on it. I think it is in progress, and I think it's good to have those letters even if we can't change legislation ourselves, because imagine if, for example, half of the councils in the UK passed a similar motion. You have a lot more pressure on the government. I have to say that an amendment has been put forward in the House of Lords, but because of the government majority, I'm not sure how likely it is to be added to the bill. But there has been an amendment saying that people who are liable to pay council tax should be able to vote in local level elections. So do follow the debate in the House of Lords, and if it comes back to the Commons, if it's voted through, they have to catch up with many House of Lords debate on the elections bill. So yes, the discussion is there. I think there is support, but I think there's a lot more work to do, and often it does help to have people like councillors, local councillors in general, showing support for policies, even if we can't directly change those policies, because it does send a strong message to the government.
Yeah, absolutely. And in passing the motion, Cambridgeshire County Council also committed to working collaboratively with the county's district councils to develop a communication strategy that will focus on voter eligibility. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yes, I think there are different levels of information campaigns, like in different councils that I've seen, in terms of who can vote and encouraging people to vote. Often what I see at the local level is people who can vote actually not knowing they can vote. So first of all, you need to ensure that your population is informed who can vote under the current rules, and especially for the 5th of May elections. But also when the elections bill becomes law and there will be some changes, well, I still hope it can be amended to allow for residency-based voting rights. But in case it doesn't happen and the voting eligibility will change, it's really important that local authorities do communicate that, because people are already confused about their voter eligibility and to be even more confused after this bill passes. And it's not only to inform residents, but also make sure that officers are informed, make sure that people, for political parties as well. Obviously, local authorities can't inform political parties directly, but people who are listening from political parties, whatever political party you're from, making sure that your activists and your volunteers who actually go and speak to residents or do voter registration actually know what the rules are. So in terms of local authority, there are many ways that you can communicate those changes. For example, I think it was last year when Cambridge City Councils or Cambridge District level did include some information about EU citizens being able to vote in, for example, local magazines or the council tax bill. So just imagine, for instance, every local authority sends out the council tax bills. You can just add there a couple of lines if the election bill passes saying, well, your voting rights have changed. if you are, from those countries, and just put a couple of lines about what has changed to make sure everyone knows. And it's a very effective way as well, because everyone reads their council tax bill. So why not put the message there? There are other creative ways to perhaps work with the other companies. So for example, people have other types of utility bills. Again, if you can include some voter registration information there as well, to be quite positive. And councils have in general like many types of publications, of course, like getting this message into local newspapers in collaboration with the council, but also trying to do voter registration and awareness at events. So often councils have or support, at least fund or part fund and support cultural events or various community organizations. So for example, if I'm doing it in my local area, an event on skills and adult education that I'm quite keen to do quite soon, for example, we can also include some materials, some non-political materials on voter registration, who can vote. So I think voter registration often happens before the election, and trying to rush this voter registration message before, let's say, the 14th of April now, when to actually have an engaged population, you need to do voter registration all year round, and kind of try to, if you have, especially if you have a fun event. I was in a London event before COVID, an Eastern European fair that was supported by some of the borough councils in London. And having a stall there, for instance, on voter registration would be quite effective, because you have often many hundreds of people in those events, and making sure that you kind of pair up the serious kind of voter registration message with something that people are usually coming to. Or when they use council services as well, you can easily kind of also give information about voter registration. So yes, there are many ideas. I think in Cambridge City, some of them have been tried already, because before I was a councillor, I was already working with the council to get some of this messaging out. But of course, the motion applies for the whole Cambridgeshire County Council. So we have many areas where we have quite a high migrant population, especially in the northeast of the county, for instance. So it would be very good to see districts there as well doing more to promote voter registration engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just encourage people to get involved in the debate, like whatever your views on the topic. I think it's also a very, very interesting discussion to be had in different political parties in terms of who should vote and in which elections, and comparing the different models of voting rights. But I would ask everyone to just think about, to put yourself in the position of a resident who perhaps, let's say, is from the United States or from a non-EU country in general, non-EU, non-Commonwealth country, and who has been in the UK for, let's say, 20, 30 years and paid council tax for 20, 30 years and cannot vote. And I'll just address one of the other criticisms, because often people say to me, well, if they've been in the country for so long, why they don't become British? I became British in 2020, so I'm both Romanian and a British citizen. But I'll have to say citizenship is not for everyone. First of all, it is really, really expensive. It costs £1,330 only for the application fee, and it doesn't include the long immigration path you have to go before with the various visas and indefinite leave to remain and so on. So if you think about a family of 4 people who are non-British citizens, it actually can cost much over £10,000 only for the citizenship fees alone, and that doesn't include the various applications beforehand. So it's really, really unaffordable for many people who are paying council tax and contributing and living in our areas. And secondly, not everyone can have dual citizenship. For example, my friends from Lithuania cannot have, I can be both Romanian and British and preserve my Romanian identity in that way. But many people can't have the luxury and the privilege of having dual citizenship. So citizenship is not an answer to voting rights. So I think what we have to think is having a voting rights system in terms of residence, like we see in Scotland and Wales, working very well, and try to encourage that, because at the end of the day, we as councillors will have a better perspective about our local areas, and we'll have an easier time as well picking up casework and getting involved if our local residents are involved and if we know what the needs of the community are. And you can't really have representation of communities without having rights, including voting rights.
Yeah, well, that was a really interesting discussion. Thank you for joining me, Councillor Bulat, and join me next time on Public Sector Voices for more insight into the public sector. If you enjoyed today's podcast and discussions, don't forget to like and subscribe, or give us a rating on whatever streaming service you're using. Thanks for listening. See you next time.